This is Entrepreneur Authorities. Whether you're building your brand, scaling your startup, or just getting started, get ready to be inspired, empowered, and equipped to take your next big leap. Hola, I'm Joe Pardaville, and today I'm joined by Dimos Parneros. Dimos spent his career helping companies grow by focusing on people, customers, and clear leadership. He played a key role in shaping Staples during its rise, then brought that same mindset to Barnes & Noble during a time of major change. Today, he mentors founders and emerging leaders, sharing the lessons he learned across 3 decades in retail and e-commerce. Dimos Parneros, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm excellent. And so I want to reminisce with you a little bit because I think kids today don't know how good they have it. You come from a time where you started at Staples when there were only 5 stores and they made about $15 million in revenue. 5 Staples. I could leave my house right now and I could probably drive past 5 Staples. So take me back to the quaint time. Like, almost paint the picture. Like, if Staples wasn't around, where would you get that junk? Like, where did you get pens and papers? Please, let's reminisce a little bit about the time before Staples became ubiquitous in the United States.
It's funny you ask because the founder of the company decided to invent Staples to start the company because he didn't know where to buy that stuff. So, quick funny story. Guy by the name of Tom Stemberg, founder of Staples, actually founder of the industry. It's this big executive, very successful guy. And what happens? He gets fired. Gets fired for his job. And he says, oh man, I've got to get my resume together. He starts typing up his resume. He runs out of ribbon. Typewriter ribbon, like a Smith Corona brother. And he goes to the store. It's a weekend. No one's open. So then finally goes into one of these price clubs and he sees this section of office products is wiped out. Guy says, I've got to go after this business. Writes the business plan, which I still have the original copy of right here on my shelf, and decides to disrupt this very old business where in the past it was basically sold out of a catalog and these little small stationery stores. And it was when the big box stores were starting to really make it into the market, like Toys R Us, things like that. He came from grocery, another big box store. So he said, why not office supplies? So he started Staples. And then he did the first one. As you said, I met him when they were 5. And somebody introduced us. I was working for Macy's, loving it. I thought, this is my job forever. I'm going to retire at Macy's. Meet this guy. And I'm thinking, wow, I really like him. Love the idea. I think I'm in. And that's what sort of got the whole thing started.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, was there any fear there because you were with this legacy company, Macy's, who, say what you will about what it is today, it's still around. Like, I often joke, Dimos, like, if you read Jim Collins' books, Good to Great, like, most of those companies that he wrote that went from good to great no longer exist. Like, one of them is Circuit City. So it's amazing that great companies do go away. I mean, this country was built on Sears Roebuck, you know what I mean? And Macy's is one of those, if people every Christmas, they watch A Miracle on 34th Street. It's Macy's. Yeah. It's still around. So what made you make that leap to go from Macy's to Staples?
I mean, getting into Macy's was sort of a big deal. You have to go through a big process. They select you. You go through this executive training. And I'm happy I'm there. My wife and I just got married. 3 months later, after meeting this guy, I'm thinking, I think I have to do this. I'm going to quit my job.
Wait,
not like me.
Wait, Dimos. 3 months?
3 months being married, 3 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But that was risky because, I'm supposed to be working hard. She's working, I'm working. And I come home and say, good news, bad news. Bad news is I quit my job, but I've got this Staples is my new job. And of course she said, what's a Staples? But yeah, it was a little risky because, this entrepreneur, this Tom Stemberg, visionary guy, he had this story about, we're going to disrupt. And I'm thinking, disrupt? What are you talking about? We're going to disrupt the marketplace. We're going to make it better for America's small businesses. We're going to offer products at great prices. We're going to be, fast and nimble. And I'm thinking, man, that sounds fun. He said, we're going to open 100 stores. And I thought, wow, I can be part of that. And so I bought in, and that was it.
Wow. What a great story. And so Staples at the time was kind of high growth, low structure. What did you learn from those early days about that scaling from 5 stores to hundreds and then God knows how many there are stores, thousands of stores. What was it like in those early days, like trying to make that jump? Because I think for many entrepreneurs, Demos, obviously the failure rate is very high. But a lot of the times it's not that idea, the concept, their expertise. It's scaling. Like, how do you make this a repeatable business? What were some of those steps you learned early on that you took forward for the next, 30, 40 years of your career about scaling and the do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was we've got one open and you try to perfect the one. And then after that, you open the second one, you learn from the two. Then you get the third and fourth one open. And then everyone keeps checking with each other to make sure we know what works, what doesn't work. What works, you keep. What doesn't work, you either fix, iterate, or if it fails, get rid of it, cut it quickly, and then change. And so they were really good at that. It was very organized. It was very well laid out. But you're right. I mean, the failure rate was high, and there were a lot of these office product startups. In fact, I think at the peak, there were about 25 of them. And in the end, there were about 2 or 3 who survived after it was all said and done. But I think the big lesson for me was figure out what works, move quickly, and if something fails, don't get hung up on it. Drop it or fix it, and then move on, move quickly, move ahead.
That's great. Good stuff. And it's funny, I think a lot of CEOs are not prepared for their roles these days because of the fact that they just didn't have the on the ground training that most people did. They usually came in from a big university, fancy diploma. They get handed like a title like out of college, and then a few years later they're a CEO. Again, Demos, you'll get to know I speak in broad strokes a lot of times, but most times the CEO gets christened early in life. But your early days at Staples, you were doing HR, marketing, merchandising, operations. How important to you was the baseline of that for the rest of your career that you learned so much? Because I always laugh when CEOs throw the, never be the smartest person in the room bit, because to me, I feel it comes across as phony because like, oh, so you're saying you're an idiot? No, you're not. You're smart enough to hire smart people. So the idea of you being not being the smartest person in the room, I think is kind of silly. But tell me about the fact that you knew enough about these sectors of a company, a little more enough to know that you were a little dangerous. Like you knew just enough. You weren't the expert in all these things, but you knew just enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing for me was they said, your first job is to open up this very first store in New York City. In fact, that's what got me in. They said, we need someone who understands New York City. And I said, well, I mean, that's a lot to understand. But I said, but I'm from New York City and I work in New York City. I think I'm good enough. I can do this. So I opened the store, but then within about 6 months, they said, we really like the way that you hired and we really like the team that you assembled. You're now in HR. And I said, but I've never done HR before. And I remember Tom saying to me, the founder, he said, okay, learn it. Just like that. And I said, learn it. He said, yeah. And I said, done. So for the next 2.5 years, that's what I did. Recruited people, hired, trained, all those things that you do. But, it's funny because in the first 10 years, I was asked to go into 10 different jobs. And I remember there's one time they said, we really want to explore this and expand this urban prototype. So downtown stores, as opposed to the big suburban stores with the parking lots and all that. So the city stores, we called those Staples Express at the time. And he said, okay, you're in charge of store design. And I remember my first reaction was, okay, but I don't really have a design background. I'm a retailer. And he said, yeah, go learn. And that was the last time I asked. I said, from this point on, anything that comes my way, I'll just figure it out. And so 10 jobs in those first 10 years. And oftentimes there's no predecessor. You're the first one in the role. So you've got to figure it out. And you have to have a little bit of guts, because if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You fix it and you move forward.
Wow. And so that lesson from Tom about like, hey, do this. I don't know how to do it. I'll go do it anyway. Did you carry that over with probably a little more nuance than Tom did later on in your career?
Oh, 100%. In fact, one of the things that I hear from people that I coached or mentored along the way is they often say, you really had a lot of confidence in me and I didn't have as much confidence in myself. Why is that? And I'll often say, well, sometimes we don't have the answer, but we know we can figure out the answer. And so we're all, I mean, I wasn't born to be, as a little boy, like 8 years old, I wasn't thinking, gee, I need to be in the office products industry. Like you just figure it out when you go. Just like you, I'm sure when you were, a 7-year-old kid growing up, you weren't thinking this is going to be my career path.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's for a lot of people. And so tell me about when you knew Staples was a thing. Like, was there a moment in your life? And I think many entrepreneurs, sometimes it goes by so fast, they don't even know it happened. But like, when did you legitimately know, like, oh, shoot, Tom wasn't crazy about this idea of having hundreds of stores around the country where you can buy like pens? Was there a moment that stood out to you?
There was. I mean, in the beginning, it was sort of a novelty. It was kind of cool. It was an entrepreneurial company. It was sort of fun. And then we started opening stores. And then we had, 5, then 10, then 20. And what I noticed was whether they were in New York or Boston or California, they worked. So this idea was applicable regardless of the geography, regardless of the customer base. And I thought, wow, this guy came up with a really brilliant idea and we're able to execute against that idea. And now all of a sudden, customers are buying in. They like this idea. They love the low prices. They love all the office products under one roof. They like that we give friendly service. It's working. So when we became a public company very early on, I thought, wow, Wall Street now thinks that we're a real deal. And so, yeah, it was pretty early on that I knew that it would be good. I have to say, and Tom often kidded about this. He'd say, well, at the annual meeting, he'd say, I just want to admit that I made a mistake. And I thought, wow, he's a humble guy. He's going to admit making a mistake. And he'd say, I thought that the ceiling was 500 stores, but I was wrong. It's like 700 stores. And the following year, he'd say, I just want to start by acknowledging my error. And instead of 700, it's 1,000. And I said, this guy needs a new narrative, but he used that every year. And I think at the peak, the industry was at about 4,000 stores. And, in the beginning, he thought there'd be maybe a few hundred. So yeah, it was pretty easy to see the signs on the, signs on the wall there. Yeah, it was good.
And so, we talked about scaling a little bit, and I'm curious, like when you scale to such a grand size, because I think at one point you had 1,800 stores and 55,000 employees under your umbrella.
Yeah.
How do you stay connected to that? Not that like you're going to know like every every 50,000 employees name, but how do you keep connected to that? You have, your stores in New York and major urban areas, but then you've got a random store in like, in the middle of North Dakota. I don't know if you did. I'm just saying. But like, how do you keep that connective tissue of like what's going on at the mothership and trickling it down to all these other stores? What's the keys to holding that all together?
It's such an important point because it's easy to get caught up in being in the big office and then everybody's out there doing the work. And so for me, having come from the stores, having come from being my first job as a store manager, I sort of had an appreciation of what these people did in their everyday life and how hard they had to work to make it really come together. So when I got into the big corporate job, I decided that I was going to spend about, not exactly perfect, but about half and half in the office and in the field. So I would actually do 300 or 400 store visits every single year, visiting all the different markets. I think I was in all the 48 states where we had stores. And people were always jazzed up. Wow, you're over here in, Missoula, Montana. Like nobody's ever come out here before, And so it's really energizing to be out there and to see. But really, it's about the team. We had a really incredible team. So you go from stores to districts to regions, and it's sort of like, ladders up. And the other thing is the communication, just really open, transparent, whether it be, town hall meetings or video meetings like this. We just had a way to, and also be willing to listen to what we're doing that was working versus what we were doing that was maybe not so smart, and then being willing to accept that and change that.
That's awesome. You eventually became president at Staples, and during a time of transition, because we're kind of going through it now, like this AI transition where everyone's just throwing gobs of money into AI. And of course, I feel like we're all kind of waiting for that bubble to burst, where like what happened with the streaming wars a few years ago, where Wall Street's going to wake up and say like, yeah, we don't care about growth anymore. Now we want to know if you're profitable. So we're going to get there with AI eventually.
Yeah.
But you happen to be doing it through the dot-bomb era of e-commerce. So let's reflect a little bit on that and what you learned from making, you describe yourself, old school retail guy, started at Macy's, worked your way up to become president of Staples, and now all of a sudden there's this thing called e-commerce. What was that like in making sure that Staples had a footprint in e-com? And how do you think that's comparable to what people are going through now in this transition to AI?
I mean, since, you mentioned the Sears Roebuck earlier in the conversation, they had that original giant book that was retail, over 100 years ago. And then there were stores, and then there were phone orders. So I have news for people who think we're going through change. We've been going through change for over 100 years. So you bring up the .com. So I remember becoming Staples president of Staples stores back in 2002, and that little .com sort of surge came in like the late 1998 to 2000. And I remember somebody wrote an article, one of the Wall Street people wrote an article like, I hope this guy who just took over as president of Staples stores knows that they're never going to open another store again because we don't need them anymore. We've got .com now.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's funny, because at that time, it was like 90% of the sales was still going through stores, and a small percentage was going through .com. And now, of course, it's much more balanced. It's not 50-50 yet, but it is growing. It's so easy to shop online. But what I learned is that customers actually want to shop the way they want to shop. They want to shop in the store. Sometimes they want to shop online. Sometimes they want to shop both, where you order on the website and you pick it up in the store. But in those early days, to me, it was about understanding what customers wanted, delivering what they want, and being close to the feedback loop and understanding what we should change and what we should offer. And usually, if you pay attention to customers, you can't go wrong.
That's interesting because tying this into AI, I think there was like a study maybe a year ago during this sort of like hype cycle of AI. They asked consumers, like, would you be interested in buying a product that is AI powered? And I think it came back to like 60 or 70% of the people didn't care. Like, yeah. and I'm sure you're like me, like, I don't need my toothbrush to be AI powered. Like, the idea that they're just slapping AI and everything. What do you think about this disconnect between what's happening in Silicon Valley and I can't even say, not even Silicon Valley, like across the world, about like, let's make everything AI, but like, will the consumers care? What's your take on that? Like, we all get that you gotta be on board, but also, will being on board connect with the consumers?
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll make it better. So I know there's the fear of, is AI going to cost people jobs? Do I need to know AI? But the truth of the matter is that good, smart companies are using AI to better understand process, execution, make things easier, reduce friction. From a customer standpoint, they're able to get more information about the customer, so they understand what you shop, what you buy, when you buy it, why you buy it, what makes you buy. And so if the retailer or the service company is able to provide you with something that's much more tailored, and you're not wasting your time getting the wrong offers, things that you don't really have an interest in, it works for both. So it makes the company more efficient, makes you kind of much more aligned with what you want. And so it can easily work for both. And so I'd say we've gone through these major step changes since the beginning of time, and companies will figure it out. I think some businesses are affected more than others, but in the retailers that I work with, I think people are embracing it, and I think they're moving at different speeds, but they're finding efficiency as well as better data and better insights for their customers.
Wow. So you led at Staples, you moved on to Barnes & Noble. You've been on a bunch of boards, and I always love to ask people that have been on boards because, as you know, Demos, my day job, I'm consulting, I'm helping entrepreneurs create podcasts and content and stuff like that. And a lot of the times they're doing it for two things. One, they like to, make some more money and such. But two, they'd love to be on a board. Like, they would love to be on the board. And I always find it funny because many a time when you ask them why, they're like, oh, I don't know, but it sounds really cool. Like it makes it does have an air of it's of gravitas, yeah, that you're on a board and you've done it a bunch of times. What is it like being what's this? What's it like really being on a board? As we know, it sounds cool. It looks great on a resume that you're on a board. I'm sure Divas, you're smiling. You get it. But
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is it really about being on the board?
Being on a board is a really important role because your principal job is oversight over the company and to support the company, the CEO, to achieve their goals. Now it varies. I happen to sit on several, like 4 or 5 startup boards. Then years ago, I sat on a family privately held company board, and then also sat on several publicly traded company boards. Start with those. Those are much more formal. I mean, you've got you're following SEC rules. You are holding a fiduciary role. You're overseeing the company and representing, the best interest of the shareholders. And so I would say it's serious work, a lot of preparation involved. It's incredibly gratifying. I was lucky enough in one of the boards, on one of the boards rather, Key Bank. Actually, when I received the phone call, I thought, why are they calling me? I mean, I'm not a banker. And I remember the CEO, she said, we'd love to have you come in and talk to us. And I said, that I run a retail company and an e-commerce business. And she said, no, I know your background. I said, right. And you know that I'm not a banker. And she said, right, I know that. And she said, yeah, but we're interested because you think differently. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we move in a very methodical way. If you're trying to grow an e-commerce business, you're moving like break speed. You're trying to move really fast. And I said, okay, well, yeah. And then we got together and I loved it. I did confess, though. I did say, I don't really go to the bank. Is that a problem with this? And I remember Beth, the CEO, she was great. She said, that's perfect. She said, because we want that kind of thinking to challenge the conventional thinking. So I think it's really, it's oversight, it's advisory, it's asking the right questions. With the smaller boards, it's a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more mentoring, a little bit more help. So different board positions have different requirements, but I think they're great. I mean, it's the interaction with the operating team is great. Having a little bit of a more long-term, bigger picture, as opposed to the, head down kind of hustling every day when you're an operator. That's kind of fun. So it's nice to be able to do the spectrum of roles.
That's cool. All right, so that's the board side. Let's flip it from the CEO, senior leadership, C-suite side. What do you like to see from a board?
Well, to me, the best thing as a C-level, whether you're a president or a CEO, you want support of your board. You want a really talented board to push you, to ask good questions, help us. We've got our head down. We're thinking about the day-to-day. Oftentimes you've got public company, you've got to report earnings every 3 months. You're like on this, hamster wheel. And sometimes it's a little tough to do the everyday job and also think 5 years down the line. I think really good boards can help with that. They ask the right questions. They help you think short-term, long-term, and they're supportive. They help guide you. I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with some really good boards.
That's awesome. All right. So, and now in your day job, you're helping a lot of startups and growth stage companies. And I'd love to get your take on, I love tying things together. I think everything's like a Quentin Tarantino movie where all the scenes tie together. But like with your career, when you started with Tom with those 5 stores and you saw what a disruptive startup was, like you said, you didn't even know what disruption meant. And now these founders like eat disruption for breakfast. What are some of the differences you're seeing now in terms of like how things were disrupted 30, 40 years ago as to how things are disrupted now?
Well, the technology is different today. I mean, there's so much more available today than back then. He was sort of disrupting a retail industry through an idea. A lot of today's disruptions are through technology and really breaking something that, breaking through with something that hasn't happened before. So in a way it's similar, but in a way it's different. I think he was also an established business person who had worked for a while. Whereas today, a lot of the startups that I interact with, not all, but many are, they graduate school. And before they even graduate college, they've got some sort of startup idea in the dorm. And by the time they graduate, it's like, I'm going to start running my business now. In fact, I had one young lady who told me she was graduating early. So last year, and I said, wow, that's great. I said, what made you do that? She said, well, my business needs me. I need to get after my business more. And so she kind of moved along and graduated early just so she would get to work faster.
Wow.
But I think the mentality is the same, which is I can figure this out. I've got to learn a lot of things. I've got to wear a lot of hats. I don't have all the answers, but there's a lot of courage and a lot of guts to go for it. And I think that's one of the common themes, whether it's 30 years ago or today. I do see that still.
That's so cool. And you see a lot of ideas. And Demos, you don't need to do this. Like you literally, if you wanted to, you could be kicking up on the beach, drinking Coronas, living your best life. But you have a passion for this. But it's not like you're going to go willy-nilly and start helping everyone and anyone. What do you see? Like, is it founder? Is it idea? Is it company? Like, what is it? What is attractive to you that says, like, almost like, when you're connecting with other human beings, what is it, that connective tissue for you that's like, oh, that's the idea I like. That's the person I like. That's the company. What sucks you in first?
There's got to be an idea somewhere, something that catches your attention. But once there's an idea, some kind of a vision, we know that it's undeveloped. There's a lot of work that needs to be filled in. To me, my top three: founder. It's got to be that person. It's got to be that person, that founder who says, I want to do this. Like, it's in their heart, not because there's a hole in the market and they can make money. No, there's got to be some sort of like something inside their gut that's driving them to want to do this. Maybe they had a sibling that went through a tough time and this has particular meaning to them. Maybe they had a hero in business that did something special and they want to change the world in some way, whether it's an environmental thing or technology or health related or whatever or product. And so I feel like there's going to be like a genuine want. Of course, they have to work hard, be smart, get other people involved. But to me, it's that founder really has to be right. And it's hard because not everyone's got all the complementary skills needed on day one. But so it's got to be a founder that's like really smart, but kind of humble at the same time. They've got to be motivated and driven, but they have to have some empathy and some care for other people who are involved in the business and not step on people. It's got to be somebody that wants to succeed, but also have a little bit of concern for the world around us and people around us. So it's a little bit of everything.
All right, Demos, let's double click on idea, because I know for many years, and this is one of the things I was always critical about entrepreneurship for about a 15 to 20 year span, the best and brightest minds were going to the most expensive universities on the planet, putting themselves in major spending lots of money to go to school, and they're brilliant because they want to create the next great app. And so I was like, man, we have a lot of like the best minds on this planet just looking to make the next dating app or the next app that's going to help us find dog food. And to me, I always found that kind of shallow. And this is from the outsider point of view, not the entrepreneur point of view. I guess entrepreneurs always have that conundrum of like find a problem, fix a problem. But I think for a majority of entrepreneurs for a long stretch of time, it was like, oh, the app. I'll find the app that fixes this problem. You're seeing that change now because of AI. So these ideas that are coming down the pike, is it everyone's just basically has their own version of an AI idea, or are there other ideas out there that you're seeing a lot of that you have a lot of passion to put yourself behind?
Tons of ideas out there. I mean, the thing that's beautiful about the startup world is that there's so many people who are creative, who have different ideas. I don't personally see a lot of app developers. I'm probably not the right target for them, so I don't want to track those. I've seen some, by the way. Yeah. I've seen some good ones. I've seen some that were so-so. But there's so few apps that are really like blockbuster. It's really hard on that one. The beauty of the startup world, it's almost like songwriting. Like I always feel like, or books. Like, how could somebody come up with a book? Hasn't it been like developed already?
Right.
Like, songs, like, wow, that's an amazing song. Like no one came up with that before. Or, somebody's written another book. How many titles are there in the world? Every week new releases come out. Same thing with startups. I mean, if like one of my favorites is Shake Shack, right? So if Shake Shack had said, look, we can't get into the burger world. I mean, there's like McDonald's, Burger King, Five Guys, all these we have no shot. Then there would be no Shake Shack, and Shake Shack is great. So there are so many who come and say, I have a different approach than this skincare product. I've got a different approach with this cybersecurity idea that I've got. And sometimes they use AI to accelerate the idea or to save on resourcing or what have you. So today, I think founders who have conviction, they don't really worry too much about it's been done before or, it's not going to work. I mean, they've got to have some kind of differentiating feature. They've got to have some sort of like angle or some kind of twist or wrinkle that makes their product, service, idea, whatever it is they're coming up with better, different. And you said it before, sometimes there's like a problem to solve, or, I used to always hear this, if there's a pain point, you solve the pain point. And so there's a lot of things that we do today. Like for me, if somebody can fix traffic in my neighborhood, that would be awesome. I'd buy into that business. So there's still lots of friction points in the world in our everyday life. When we travel, for example, whoever came up with that clear thing, the eye thing, I love that. That's quick. That's great. So there's lots of things, and there'll be hundreds more. I mean, I can't believe that I've actually spoken with over 200 founders who've pitched their idea.
Wow.
And it's been a great learning for me. Some I think were nuts. And others, I'm like, man, I wish I could invest in like 5 more, 10 more.
Oh, that's so cool. So after 30, 40 years of retail, e-com, operations, marketing, HR, real estate, being a CEO of a publicly traded company, let's talk leadership. Like, what are some of the leadership lessons that maybe, we can even go back to your family coming over from Cyprus, where if you were to put a gun to my head, Demos, I would not be able to find Cyprus on a map. I know it's in the vicinity of Greece somewhere. I apologize. But tell me about like some of those leadership lessons that maybe start from those 5 stores at Staples or maybe way before that in Cyprus, about leadership that to you still holds true. Like it's golden rule for Demos. What's one that has withstood the test of time going way back?
Curiosity, interest in learning, just an appetite to learn, to understand, to have an appreciation for what somebody else is doing. When we came over, I was about 8 years old, didn't speak the language. What's the first thing you need to do? Learn to speak the language. Then you speak the language and now you can read. Now it's like, wow, this world of books and learning. And I fell in love with books, and my curiosity just hasn't stopped since, being an 8-year-old boy. So I think that curiosity, hard work. I mean, we came over for a better life. My father brought the 6 kids over, my mother and the 6 kids, for a better life. So how do you get a better life? You work hard, land of opportunity, all that. That's true. I believe that today, still, all these years later. So I think it's hard work, it's curiosity, compassion for other people, knowing that other people are in a tough spot. A little empathy, I think, goes a long way. A little care, a little understanding, give somebody the benefit of the doubt. Push hard, work hard, but you can be successful and do it the right way also.
That's great. And so my mom came over from Cuba when she was 17, and she told me that she learned English by watching game shows. What was your hack for learning the English language when you were like 8 or 9?
Yeah, 8 or 9. I mean, so we showed up. It was a Friday night, and then Monday morning we're in school.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was like snowing. I'm like, what the heck, right? By the way, Cyprus in the heart of the Mediterranean, no snow.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. So what was that like as a kid? Barely, like you probably had a rough estimate of like what English was like, but like new school, new life. I mean, that had to have been like mind-boggling.
It was a little bit of a culture shock. I mean, it was listening, trying to pick up words, just like a little kid who listens and repeats words. And somebody asks you a question you can't answer. It's sign language. It's like eye contact. And then little by little, you pick up words become sentences become paragraphs, and we're off to the races. So when people tell me they can't do something, I'm like, yes, you can. So that's actually been a good lesson for me, is when people have self-doubt, I always feel like you can figure it out. I mean, focus, be intentional, get after it, and you can do it. I mean, there's really not a whole lot that I think people can't figure out.
Awesome. That's great. Demos, if folks wanted to get in touch with you, find out more about you, where should they start? What's a good place to introduce themselves to Demos Parneros?
I mean, LinkedIn, I've got tons of connections on LinkedIn, so that's a good way to see the background and sort of the purpose. The Demos website is another good place to go. So yeah, probably those two.
Awesome. Demos, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
And that'll do it for this episode. If you're an entrepreneur ready to grow your industry recognition as an author and entrepreneur.com contributor, go to authorities.entrepreneur.com.